Hello and welcome to the Real-Time Tax Calculation SAP Ariba webinar. My name is Neela Hirani and I will be facilitating today's session. Our presenters are Sandra Biele and Bernd Duscher from Deloitte and Maike Lange from Vertex. I will now hand you over to the Deloitte and Vertex team for the presentation.
Hello everyone. This is today's agenda. We will start with a quick introduction of the Deloitte and Vertex presenters. Sandra will talk about the procurement and finance vision called Touchless AP, and then Bernd will explain the technical challenges of VAT compliance in SAP Ariba. I will close with demonstrating how VAT compliance and Touchless AP looks in SAP Ariba with a Vertex integration. My name is Maike Langen. I am a German certified tax advisor and a solution manager with Vertex Inc. In this role, I support our customers as well as alliance partners during the implementation of Vertex various tax software solutions. Prior to Vertex, I worked for the German tax authorities as well as a senior manager in the tax technology team with Ernst & Young Germany. I pass on to Bernd Duscher.
Thanks, Maike. My name is Bernd Duscher. I'm a director in the indirect tax department of Deloitte in Düsseldorf. I have over 25 years of experience as a process consultant in the SAP environment, mainly with a focus on sales, logistics, and procurement processes. That means I've been working for almost 20 years within Deloitte in the consulting division. But a few years ago, I moved to the tax department, focus on combining technology topics with indirect taxes. So, which technologies are currently available and how they can be used properly for tax. Therefore, I'm going to explain you today the embedded indirect tax options in SAP Ariba itself. I'll hand over to Sandra.
Thanks, Bernd. And my name is Sandra Biele, and I'm a director in the service line Indirect Tax at Deloitte in Stuttgart. I have over 20 years of experience with ERP systems with a strongly focus on taxes and GOBD. My key topics are automatic tax determination, electronic invoicing, archiving, and setting up controls and systems. For 5 years, and before I joined Deloitte in January 2020, I was responsible for a team of IT experts within the tax department of a large retail group. And we've implemented their tax-relevant requirements in IT systems for 30 countries, for example, Europe, US, and Australia. Before we talk about the processing of invoices with input tax, with one example in Ariba and another example of a Vertex integration in Ariba, let's have a brief look at current developments and trends for invoice processing and also share some principal thoughts about VAT compliance. Nowadays, when you think of process optimization and using new technologies, the accounting is also focused on one's attention. Incoming invoices are processed more and more efficiently by using technology. With new applications and the support of artificial intelligence, you can read unstructured data, for example PDF invoices, now better and more automated. Workflow supports you in fast processing of invoices and their quickly payment. Overall, your objective is here that you have only manual intervention in invoice processing if there are exceptional cases. Artificial intelligence enhances the automated processes of invoices with the use of cognitive abilities. And current developments regarding electronic invoices, you all know the topic X-Invoice, or X-Rechnung in German, creates a new transnational standard. We also notice a trend in direction to the so-called touchless IP. Touchless AP that stands for the complete automatic processing of incoming invoices as an end-to-end process from the time invoices are received in your company to the time of their payment. Here we see the procurement process with the order, the receipt of goods or services, the invoice, the payment, and the VAT return. Let's look at this process from a compliance perspective. At the bottom of this slide, you can see some important keywords. GOBD, this is the German standard for bookkeeping and archiving principles for systems. the process documentation, which is also very important for Germany, proper archiving, or that you have a traceable and documented audit trail. In the past, the focus was on the receipt of the invoices. For example, how you store paper invoices properly, or under what conditions a storage via electronic image is possible, which controls you need in the process to properly receive electronic invoices, or how to deal with unstructured data that is read from PDF. In the meantime, the focus of VAT compliance changed towards the entire invoice processing. So in addition, the AP process uses now technology for more efficiency and automation during the whole process. Departments or processes are outsourced to shared service centers, or marketplaces are used, and with them, the process efficiency now covers not only your own process, but also the entire process involving your business partners. And therefore, you have an almost seamless processing of data from your supplier to your own company. This trend reveals completely new topics for VAT compliance, and appropriate controls are required, especially from a VAT perspective. Let's now take a closer look at the necessary controls in this process. I think you all know the so-called three-way match: checking the order, the receipt of goods, the invoice, and the corresponding prices and quantities in them. This commercial check is now part of the default system setting. We simply put a tick on it. If you look at the formal check, for example, whether the mandatory details are indicated on the invoice, there's normally no default system functionality available that supports this check. And if you then look at a tax assessment, it means the correct tax amount and the assignment of tax codes. There is also no standard system functionality, and often the assignment of the correct tax code is still done completely manual in AP departments. For automatic invoice processing, you would need to set up a logic for VAT in the system. This logic is normally not available in the scope of a standard system. And in addition, we can only build a system logic with data we really keep in the system. For VAT in particular, some information may not be available as data in the system. For example, in my experience, I can tell you that a ship from country is often only printed on the delivery notes and not kept as data in the system, and therefore it cannot be used for VAT logic. This means that, especially for automatic invoice processing, controls like the formal checking of invoices, or verification of the correct assignment of the tax code, or enhancement of additional data must be extra built into the system. This next slide shows the mandatory details needed for a proper invoice based on the EU VAT system directive. For some of the necessary information, you can directly imagine which check would be technical solvable and also in which way. For example, using mandatory fields or cross-checks for master data in the system. Now let's take a look at what we need to consider in order to set up an automatic logic for VAT, especially for the correct tax code assignment in the system. VAT requirements can become very complex, depending on the business model and the international activities of your company. This slide shows typical issues which you may need to take into account. For example, supply chains can be highly complex simply because they are multi-level, with 3, 4, or even more parties being involved. If this is combined with different transport agreements, a wide range of VAT scenarios can result. Another example is the residence status for the VAT registration, which, depending on the national law, may result in different presentation in VAT reporting. For automatic invoice processing, the setup of the VAT system logic should map this complexity and be able to propose a tax code that is secure enough to either allow automatic processing or initiate an exception handling via manual processing. And however, please keep in mind that in any manual handling has a negative impact on your efficiency on the process. And this means that you really need a very good automatic text determination. For a process automation that also includes VAT compliance, it is essential that the automatic text determination meets the VAT requirements and considers the business model, implements country-specific legal requirements, but is also easy to understand for the user and provides the user with sufficient guidance that he can be VAT compliant. And at the end, documents VAT results in a proper and sufficient way. So you need an IT solution which is set up based on rules and which hardly allows any manual user influence and also includes sufficient validation and controls. So as a summary, we would like to look with you again at a touchless AP process from a VAT perspective. In traditional invoice processing, there are manual checks of the invoices, for example, checks of mandatory details, as well as checks of correct tax statement and tax amount. These checks are done before the invoice is entered into the system, and thus before the reporting process for VAT returns to authorities starts. The employees are trained using VAT learnings and guidelines, and they also know when the tax department should be involved. Efficiency by using automated processes like touchless AP is achieved by the fact that the invoice, which is entered by the supplier in the marketplace, that this invoice goes directly into the automatic invoice processing. And this process controls like the verification of mandatory disclosures and for the correct assignment of the tax codes, they are of great importance. And now have a look on this in SAP Ariba, and I would like to hand over to my colleague Bernd.
Thanks, Sandra. So yeah, now I would like to show you what Ariba can do in the terms of touchless AP. So let us take a brief look at the main steps in the purchasing process. For example, an employee needs a new laptop. As already explained by Sandra, the operational purchasing process on the right-hand side follows the usual steps that typically we all know. However, some other steps were necessary before. See on the left the so-called procurement process. So that the laptop can appear in the shopping catalog for the employee, suitable suppliers had to be found, evaluated, and selected. Finally, you concluded a contract with the supplier containing net price, delivery, and payment conditions. From a tax point of view, however, the contract usually contains only a formal phrase like, I quote, "We will apply current tax rates," end of quote, but without any detailed specification to apply in a certain scenario. So SAP Ariba combines all these steps listed here on the picture in one application. And because Ariba is a global cloud application, it makes thousands of suppliers immediately available to your company via the so-called Ariba network. So our first conclusion, your purchasing department typically loves Ariba, especially for the purchase of indirect materials and services. It helps to reduce the uncontrolled so-called maverick buying of employees, though buying without approvals, out purchase orders of such items. Now I show you a more detailed description of the purchasing process. So let us focus on the VAT requirements in the invoice regularization step with Ariba buying. Of course, we must first check if you have actually received the ordered goods or services. The so-called three-way match always makes sense from a commercial point of view. However, I would like to highlight the following. The three-way match is usually based in all IT systems, including Ariba, on the comparison of the net values between the purchase order and the received invoice, not the gross values including indirect taxes. Simple reason behind that, typically, you assume that indirect tax is just a transitory item in your accounting, so it can be neglected in this check. So in the end, it doesn't matter commercially. Yeah. As a second step of the invoice verification, I have to check whether we are in possession of a correct supply invoice, like Sandra mentioned. So I need to conduct all the formal checks according to Article 226 of European VAT Directive. And finally, we must check and determine how this invoice is to be assessed for indirect tax purposes and signed and reported to the correct tax authority. This assessment is typically condensed in the tax code in Ariba as well. So in the next few minutes, I would like to explain to you what SAP Ariba can offer us in terms of functions and help, especially for the last 2 points on the slide. So let's first have a look at the recorded process of how your supplier can technically enter his invoice directly in Ariba. Typically, this is done by a sales clerk at the supplier side who does not necessarily have a good command of the details of tax law. And for this demonstration, we have deliberately recorded an example with some errors. So here we see like it's something shipped from UK, and now it's important tax rate type. I have to enter some text in Ariba. He enters triangular, so like the spelling error, enters a rate of 0, but enters a tax amount which doesn't fit to the tax rate. Rated, again, triangular transaction, doesn't make maybe fully sense. And from a VAT perspective and a law reference, which is maybe not correct at all. So, but what we show you here, he can continue. Ariba doesn't hurt him to enter this kind of not correct information, and he can create an invoice and submit it to you. So here again, another screenshot from Ariba that shows that wrong entries are technically possible in SAP Ariba. For example, again, the vendor can enter a tax rate of 23% with the corresponding tax amount, even though it's actually classified as a tax-exempt intercommunity supply with the green fields. So the various field contents on the screen are not consistent. Still, Ariba allows you to do that. So how can we, as a recipient of invoice, influence SAP Ariba to prevent or at least reduce this kind of mistakes? So here's some good news. So Ariba provides a functionality called business rules. And we can group the rule set into 3 groups. So therefore, the first one is so-called default transaction rules. Like a rule set, I define rules that apply to all kinds of invoices. So it doesn't matter which supplier sends the invoice and which country and legislation is applicable. Now, especially interesting for us tax people are the so-called country rules. So I can define per country which invoice fields are mandatory fields and must always be filled with content. This helps us a lot to ensure that the formal requirements, as mentioned before, are met. And Ariba does provide rule set per country out of the box, and I can even influence, adjust them as well. But be aware, I cannot always check the respective field content for correctness. As an example, here on the right-hand side, I can require that the supplier enters his VAT ID with which he creates his invoice. That means under which VAT number he sold the goods or services to us. And it's depicted with this asterisk typically in Ariba. However, in this example, there is no technical connection from Ariba to the European fees database to validate the actual validity of this number. Still, this leaves a risk, especially for tax-exempt invoices. And I can still apply like a rule set to certain groups of suppliers. This is more interesting for the purchasing department or commercial aspects. So the conclusion of this slide, the functionality business rules on country level is very helpful and should be used in any case. But it cannot ensure 100% compliance according to the missing content check. So now let's come to the important point of correct tax assessment. So that we classify the invoice correctly for the tax return in the right country or jurisdiction. So there are 2 moments in time in Ariba where I can carry out this assessment. That means that Ariba does provide a VAT calculation logic to prevent mistakes I had shown you earlier in the recorded demo. The first VAT calculation happens at the time of the purchase requisition. However, from an IT perspective, this moment in time a little bit unusual because it's somehow questionable or risky from a VAT point of view. Because at that moment in time of the purchase requisition, the actual supplier may not yet be known, or maybe not be clear from which country of departure the goods will be actually delivered. For example, at first acquisition time, will it be a domestic supply or a cross-border supply? Therefore, the result of this tax calculation is at most an expected value. And the second VAT calculation happens at the receipt of the vendor invoice, of course. But which content or data is now actually used in the tax calculation of Ariba? Let's have a look. At the moment of the tax purchase acquisition, a calculation is carried out, as mentioned. And from all the information or data available in Ariba, a lot of fields, a lot of screens, SAP Ariba uses just 3 fields for VAT or tax validation: material group, ship from country, and ship to country. That's it. So for tax experts like us, it's easy to see already here that these 3 fields will never be sufficient to cover more complex tax transactions. The combination of these 3 fields drive the tax code definition in Ariba. And with this tax code, a further table is now used to look up what the current tax rate and thus tax amount in this purchase decision is. Final result is stored. And now on the right-hand side, when we receive the corresponding vendor invoice, Ariba carries out another tax calculation, applying exactly the same logic. It then compares, of course, whether the expected tax amount of the purchase acquisition matches the amount on the invoice, like a two-way match in that sense. If there's no tax amount at all, the error message, tax calculation failed, appears. Then from a tax point of view, there was an interesting functionality in Ariba. Ariba is also able to configure and accept tolerances of tax amounts. This concept to accept small tolerances is common for deviation in net amounts. So it helps to avoid costly admin handling for a difference of a few cents, for example, because commercially it doesn't make sense. But tax tolerances are not allowed in the European VAT law. So this functionally seems useless for us, at least within the EU countries. And here a little bit more deep dive into the technical representation of these 4 essential tax tables in Ariba. So it's like the tables you will see, and you can configure is tax code header with tax code details in the green color, as well as tax code lookup and tax component in the blue color. These 4 tables have a predefined structure of columns. That's it. And you must fill them with content yourself. So these are empty CSV tables. That is, when you first set them up for the first go live, you have to fill them, but also when you need to consider subsequent data, process, or even legal changes. And as mentioned before, it's easy to see that these table structures cannot be used to present more complex tax transactions, but can only be used for, let's say, more or less domestic or simple cross-border transactions. And if your company is only partially entitled to deduct input tax, like banks or real estate companies, this is not foreseen in this table structures at all. Now, important technical remark. So if your company has more complex purchasing scenarios, as just mentioned, a typical IT approach will be, well, we configure additional functionality or we have it programmed. So in the SAP R3 or HANA world I'm coming from, this is a common, widely used approach. Yeah, let's tweak it. But since Ariba is a pure cloud-based platform, that means all companies use it at the same time. Those company-specific enhancement I would like to do can basically not be made at all, or only to a very limited extent, and only then in consulting with, well, in alignment with SAP Ariba development itself. So in a nutshell, your IT department cannot really help. And final look, now how much maintenance is required for these tax code lookup table, which is like the core, the heart of the Ariba logic. My classic consultant answer here, it depends. Especially how many different material groups are procured through Ariba and for which of your companies or countries. So we already arrive at 2,500 combinations, even in the not entirely unrealistic example of 250 material groups for 10 countries. And if you add that you not only source from always one country, but from multiple countries, then this number is multiplied for each material group with multi-sourcing. And if you leave the European view and look to the United States, they can break down like data, like tax law bound to state and city level. Ariba provides even fields for ship to state and ship from state, but then of course it's clear that in the US the number of required combinations may increase drastically. The final conclusion of the Ariba functionality. The good news to be kept in mind is Ariba does provide a certain functionality for indirect taxes. So remember the business rules, and it has a simple tax calculation logic. So in the end, you need to assess for your company if this provided functionality is sufficient enough for you. And you have to take into account as well that you have to maintain all the necessary table, tax master, like the empty tables I just shown you, you have to maintain and update them all the time yourself. So these weaknesses are also recognized by Mr. Bourjani, responsible for the SAP Ariba product overall. So therefore, I would like now hand over to Michael Lang from Vertex, who will now show you how Vertex O Series can eliminate these weaknesses.
Thanks, Bernd, for showing the capabilities and limitations of SAP Ariba's integrated tax determination logic. I will give a brief introduction who we are as Vertex and demonstrate how VAT compliance and touchless AP looks in SAP Ariba with a Vertex integration. Vertex has more than 40 years of experience with a sole focus in tax technology. This means that our solutions are focused on tax determination, tax data management, and tax reporting. Our more than 1,000 employees are located all around the globe, with a European presence in the UK, Ireland, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and Sweden. Today, I'm talking about the Vertex tax engine connection to the procurement software SAP Ariba. But our software not only connects to different procurement softwares, such as Ariba or Coupa, it also easily connects to various other types of systems, such as ERP systems as SAP S/4HANA or Oracle, or e-commerce platforms like Magento or Zuora. Here you see some of our reference customers using our solution in various ERP and procurement systems for European tax determination. In total, over 250 customers are using our solution for European tax determination. Many of these should be familiar to you. These companies you see here are not just operating our European solution, but also our global tax content, for example, for the US or Latin America. Vertex has a strong partnership with SAP, as well as with SAP Ariba since 2017. We work closely with the SAP Ariba product management team, and we co-developed the SAP Ariba Tax API, which is the interface between SAP Ariba and Vertex. This enables our solution to integrate effortless and smooth into SAP Ariba. As SAP Ariba is a relatively new product, we have already sold 20 Vertex SAP Ariba licenses and 9 customers are live as of April 2020. Customers who implemented SAP Ariba with Vertex are, for example, Coca-Cola, Ford, or Toyota. Now I want to show you the interaction with Vertex in the SAP Ariba workflow. At each stage where a tax determination is needed, there is an interaction with Vertex. So starting on the left, Ariba passed all facts of that requisition to Vertex. Here it is important to know that Vertex is not limited to use the Ariba standard fields, as Bernd mentioned, ship from, ship to, or material. Vertex uses all fields available and data in SAP Ariba. So it's not limited, it uses all available information for tax determination. Only by doing so, it is possible to handle even complex VAT transactions. Now, the embedded rules within Vertex interrogate those facts and pass back the response. So an expectation of the VAT either to be charged by the vendor or self-assessed by the purchaser will be shown. Also, it calculates the recoverability of the VAT. Vertex can handle several types of recoverability factors, either by content, such as VAT restrictions on certain purchases, like leased cars or business entertainment, or by user-defined recoverability rules, which can be easily set and maintained in Vertex, for example for restricted businesses such as financial institutes or real estate companies. It is optional to call Vertex at the requisition stage. Many fully taxable businesses aren't so worried about VAT in this stage, but partially exempt ones certainly are, and Vertex can help them to get a full picture of the true costs upfront. As the Ariba workflow continues, the supplier sends the invoice with VAT on it. Then Vertex is called again and will flag up any differences between what the VAT the vendor has charged and what Vertex calculates to be charged. Without Vertex in place, you are completely at the mercy of the vendor's tax determination and your own personal ability to spot VAT inconsistencies. This is a clear risk. If the invoice is approved, Vertex will produce a tax code. This data is used to complete the OK-to-pay file, which passes the transaction back to the ERP system for further processing. Here we see the invoice reconciliation flow in more detail. An Ariba supplier sent an invoice with 19% German VAT for the purchase of a table. In the interaction between Ariba and Vertex, Vertex confirms that 19% German VAT is right and that the VAT is deductible. In addition, it assigned tax code D1 so that the OK-to-pay file can pass to the background ERP and the transaction can be posted properly. Here we have the same invoice with 19% German VAT, but our company has only a right to deduct 50% input VAT due to input VAT restrictions. In this case, Vertex will determine this and assign the correct tax code. Here it's D2. Therefore, only 50% input VAT will be deducted and used for reporting purposes. And here again, we have an invoice with 19% German VAT, but in this case, it was actually a cross-border transaction. The supplier should not have charged VAT. Vertex determines that, and that invoice is passed back to Ariba with a note for the AP clerk. Please clarify, we expected your invoice to show 0% EC sale of goods. The invoice is on hold, pending whatever the preferred escalation process is. Without Vertex in place and accepting that 19% VAT, which may be multiplied up over time, this could lead to massive over-recoveries of input VAT. This video will show a general example of using Vertex tax engine to calculate VAT for Ariba Cloud. In this solution, because Vertex is connecting to Ariba's cloud environment, Vertex is bound by the functionality and the timing of the Ariba API calls. Vertex is called for tax calculation at 2 times during the procure-to-pay process within Ariba, once during requisition time and again for the invoice reconciliation process. I will walk you through an example transaction from a buyer's perspective to illustrate the 2 tax calculations. To begin a transaction, first you must shop the catalog within Ariba Buying. It is important to note that Vertex supports tax calculation on both catalog and non-catalog items. Here we shop for a catalog item for this example transaction. As you can see, it's 100,000 US dollar. The amounts in this catalog are expressed in USD for the purpose of this demo, but obviously they can be in any currency as set up in your catalog. Items are added to the cart as the catalog is shopped. Here we purchase an item called Tiger from one of our suppliers. Once all applicable items have been added to the cart, you can update the cart with relevant purchasing details. These details can often have an effect on tax calculation. For example, the delivery address. In our example, we are changing the contact details of the vendor to France and the ship to plant to France, effectively creating a domestic French transaction. This is only necessary in this example, as we are using a US demo instance. Normally, you would find the right seller and purchaser details populated in Ariba and no need to update this. Vertex supports the standard data elements in SAP Ariba's text API, but also reads all available fields in SAP Ariba as well as custom fields. This enables Vertex to process even complex VAT transactions. Once the cart has been updated to reflect the details of the requisition, you can elect to make a manual call to Vertex for tax calculation via the Update Text button. Please note that the tax calculation will also take place automatically, even if the requisitioner doesn't manually click the Update Text button when the requisition is submitted. On the screen now is an example of the tax calculation being returned. This amount will be used during the approval process in conjunction with any purchasing thresholds you have configured in the standard Ariba solution. In this example, we have 20,000 USD of VAT returned from Vertex, which is 20% French VAT on the 100,000 purchase price of the item. As previously mentioned, the calculated tax amount is used in the approval workflow. It can be used in the decisioning process. Once the requisition is approved, it is sent to the supplier as a purchase order. The next step in the process is for the supplier to create an invoice and send it to the buying organization. For purpose of this demo, we have already created a vendor invoice with a tax amount that is different than the Vertex estimated tax. Here we see the second call for the tax calculation to Vertex, as was described earlier in the process flow. See how there is no Update Text button and already two taxes are shown. The expected tax amount shown here, the $20,000, is the tax calculation returned by Vertex, and the tax amount of $12,000 is what the supplier submitted on the invoice. The expected tax amount is already there when you open the invoice reconciliation, as the call happens in the background. As in this example, the expected tax is different than the invoice tax amount. This created an exception that needs to be dealt with. Continuing with our example, the options that Ariba offers are: accept the invoice tax amount from the supplier, accept the expected tax amount that was calculated from Vertex, or reject the invoice entirely. Once this decision has been made, the invoice will either be rejected or accepted and moved to the OK-to-pay file if accepted, which ends the process within Ariba. Any further processing will happen within the connected ERP system. We would also like to set out some of our examples how leveraging the superior content of a tax engine creates some very significant impacts implementing and maintaining tax determination. Our solution delivers the VAT rate content for countries all over the world. This means with Vertex, all materials will be charged with the correct VAT rate, which will be even more important when the definitive VAT system will be introduced, where you have to charge the local VAT of the destination of the goods. As you know, if a product is, for example, standard rated in Germany, it can be exempt in the UK, like motorcycle helmets. Another example how our content helps you to enable your tax determination are the place of supply rules for your materials, which we will keep constantly updated. This means that we know whether a supply is a supply of goods or a supply of service, depending on the specific country regulations. And also, we will apply the correct place of supply routes, for example, for digital services. In addition, our solution can handle complex transactions, such as chain transactions, supplied to special regions, or domestic or extended reverse charge. Here you see what our clients say. Overall, you need a tax determination solution for SAP Ariba if you are operating not only locally, have complex transactions, and want to be prepared for future changes. In summary, we have three options when it comes to VAT management in SAP Ariba. First, you could operate a manual VAT process, which is not efficient and risky, as you have to train your AP team as tax experts. Second, you can use the native SAP Ariba logic, which is high maintenance and also not able to handle complex transactions, as only 3 data fields are used. And third, therefore, the only option for a true compliant and touchless AP process is only with SAP Ariba and the Vertex tax engine, as we can handle complex transactions and provide always up-to-date VAT content.
So now we have shown an example for tax determination in SAP Ariba with the Vertex integration, and how touchless AP would look like for the accounts payable department if the VAT requirements are represented by controls during the process. With Vertex, VAT issues, including complex business transactions, can also be implemented for input side. For thus, we have a rule-based IT solution even for complex VAT issues. We have seen that Vertex enables the assignment of the tax valuation via a tax code to the user, and the user can rely on it. In terms of controls, we have seen that the three-way match is available by default. The formal verification of the mandatory invoice data can be supported via Ariba. And we have also seen that a tax assessment is made at a point of purchase requisition and invoice processing. For that, we thank you very much for your attention. And now let's have a look at your questions during the seminar. We got one first questions. I just read it. Once invoice is generated in the supplier ERP, but register the invoice manually in Ariba, which is the legal invoice? And is this an e-invoice? So do we have the right to deduct VAT determined by Vertex? So just shortly, the supplier, the invoice, he has manual registered in Ariba. They put in Ariba. That's the invoice he has sent on its way. So that's the invoice. Is it really a kind of e-invoicing? Yeah, some kind of e-invoicing, I would say, because he gives you the data, yeah, and you have the right to deduct the VAT because the supplier has issued the invoice to you in a predefined way in Ariba, and the invoice was received by you in Ariba. So there's a predefined way between you and your supplier. The second question.
Yes, let me answer that. The question is, what if any mistype by invoice issuer, but their PDF invoice image is correct, but Ariba not? How Vertex can confirm right data? So when you receive an invoice via the Ariba network, then the PDF document is usually just a help to make the encrypted data readable. So the initial invoice, it will be the encrypted data within Ariba. So usually the PDF, it's just for your help, and that's not the actual invoice. So the actual invoice are the Ariba data. And obviously, Vertex cannot do a match between the PDF and the Ariba data, so it will take the Ariba data for that determination. But this would be, in this case, fully correct, as the Ariba data are the data that are counting here.
Yeah. And Maike, if I'm correctly, in Vertex, you have the possibility to define which fields of the Ariba data, of the purchase order, the purchase requisition, and the invoice you can take for the Vertex tax determination.
Yes, you're correct. So you can choose which data you want to take into account for your VAT determination. But yeah, this will be the data out of Ariba.
Yeah. And that's very important because out of that perspective, we really need to look for the delivery way, the transport agreements, and whatever we need to make a good tax determination. Okay. And the last question is Ariba an e-invoicing tool need to register to local tax authorities as the invoicing software, handle reporting as issuing e-invoices? Ariba itself, I don't think that it's an invoicing tool. You can do e-invoicing tool for tax authorities. I think the background of this question is the Italian e-invoicing process. And if I'm looking at the Italian e-invoicing process, in that case, I don't think that you would enhance the Ariba process or you would take the Ariba process with invoicing. I think there you would take the Ariba process with purchase requisition and purchase order and good receipt for data transfer between supplier and your company, and the invoice processing in Italy, you have the invoice to issue to the tax authorities. So the supplier will use his channel to the tax authorities to issue the invoice, and you will receive the invoice via your channel to the tax authorities. And for that, I would assume that in this case, the Ariba process is not the first process I would use for invoicing. Maybe I have misunderstood the question.
And there were some more questions. The next one would be, what would be the effort to implement Ariba buying and Vertex integration? And so the effort to Ariba buying, that's not something we could talk about today. That's an Ariba project. The Vertex integration, I can just tell you that we have predefined project plans and rules. So it's a very smooth and easy project. And if you are interested in more details, feel free to drop us an email, and we can organize a one-to-one conversation. The next question, is the application able to apply different prorates, e.g. for different cost centers? Is the application used by any FI in Germany or the EU already? So yes, we can apply different prorates depending on cost centers or different materials. So we can set up any prorates as you want if we have a factor to allocate this to, like, for example, cost centers. Is the application used by any FI in Germany or the EU already? Yes, we showed you the slide with the solution. So we have our tax solution already live with over 250 companies in Germany, not in Germany, all over Europe. And these are using our European solution currently.
And Maike, maybe also some words about the process description for the tax finding in the Vertex? For the tax audit purpose, I think that's also a good question for you.
Yes, so that's always, there's a process. So the question is there a process description for the tax finding in Vertex available, which shows the logic behind which we can provide for the tax audit purposes. Yes, so it's not a black box where nobody knows what it does. We have documentation as well as we can show the audit trail, so we can show which data goes out of Ariba into our tax engine. We can show how tax is calculated, and we can show what the result that's passed back into Ariba, and also then that's passed to your ERP system. So for audit purposes, we can provide the trail.
And maybe because I'm doing a lot of GOPD work, we had in the last days, we had the last look in the SAP ERP system. The Vertex documentation is getting really good if you want to check individual documentation of the tax determination. Yeah, and I think you have also enhanced the SAP accelerator documentation.
Yes, so not only for Ariba, so also for our other solutions, we are constantly working to improving our documentation, and it's getting more transparent and better.
I think we have now answered all the questions. For that, we would like to thank you for your attention.
Yep, thank you very much. Thanks, Sandra. I'd like to say thank you to our presenters, Sandra Biele and Bernd Duscher and Michael Langer, and would like to thank everyone on this call today. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.